by writing a very slanderous email that they sent out to all city employees in Murrieta. And as we all know, the city, the corporate business called, the city of Murrieta, employs more people in this bedroom community than any other thing in this valley. And that is no small number of people. And the email that Sergeant Marcellus Reed, who is one of the named defendants in our civil suit, sent out this email. And it said, subject, safety concern for city personnel. The following email is applicable to all City of Murrieta personnel. Dr. David Dortch is an optometrist and owner of Spectrum Vision Center in unincorporated Murrieta. His practice was previously in the City of Murrieta. So they make a big deal about unincorporated versus corporated.
Interesting.
It matters not the morning that they, go out of their jurisdiction to arrest him because they can. They have magic badges and cute little costumes. So, going on, it says a recent investigation involving his family has exposed several areas of concern, with the most severe being his quote-unquote sovereign citizen ideology. The sovereign citizen movement has increased nationally, and their beliefs typically pose a safety concern for law enforcement and anyone representing government. This information is being disseminated for the safety of all city personnel who may be current or future clients, and to afford you the opportunity to make an informed decision when providing personal information, to include your place of employment. If you have any questions regarding this matter, please contact me. And then he gives his number and extension number. Marcellus Reed, Sergeant, Murrieta Police Department. Dave and I have never made public statements about our political views, but I can tell you right now, sovereign citizen is some kind of crazy made-up term that is an oxymoron of epic proportions. I liken it to being a virgin whore. An atheist Christian.
Right.
It's absurd. You're either sovereign or you're a citizen. Mm-hmm. You are both. So, to the best of our knowledge, that is some kind of reference from, they had to have looked at things that we have been, this is the thought police, because they had to look at our computers and say, oh, what are the websites they frequent? What kind of stuff do they listen to? Well, a friend of ours had sent us a couple of DVDs done by Tim Turner, who was of that Restore the Republic, I think is what it was called.
Right, yeah.
And coincidentally, he was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison 4 days after Zachary's initial arrest. So this was on the, police radar, so to speak, as, this was a quote-unquote, because they accuse him of being a sovereign citizen. So apparently, because we listened to 2 of his lectures and said, no way, this, because we don't belong to any kind of groups at all. It's totally against our philosophical beliefs. We do not belong to any organized, corporate, anything, period. So this is just a made-up term to make it look like, we're a real risk to our community. And what's funny about that is when we finally do get official charges, there's no mention of any of that. But yet in this email, it's the most severe thing that they came across. This is the most worrisome thing. But yet in the end, they end up charging Dave with manufacturing a controlled substance. They even dropped the child endangerment charge, although at the last preliminary hearing, the Deputy District Attorney, Jade Holder, is threatening to add it back again. But we'll get to that in a little bit. Mm-hmm. Okay, so during this time that we're dealing with all of this stuff with Zach, we've also filed this civil suit. So we're representing ourselves, and we had to do case management hearings in the beginning of December of 2013. And then we were actually able to get default judgments on all of these people that we sued because they ignored their summons completely.
Oh, really?
And so we have a default judgment hearing before a Judge Webster down at the historic court, and all judgments end up being thrown out on how the proof of service was done. And mind you, the elected DA, Paul Zellerbach, is the lead defendant on our civil suit that we filed ourselves. And we notice that this guy that we've seen at a bunch of other hearings for Zach, the restraining order hearing in November, he's there again at this hearing for the default judgments. Well, when we're ruled against, which was no shock or surprise that we were going to be ruled against because, you know, you're trying to sue members of law enforcement, you're trying to question this entire system. You know, because the courts can't exist without the cops, and the cops can't exist without the courts, and, you know, the judges sit on the top of that. So I noticed this man that I've seen at these other hearings. And so when we're done in the courtroom, and I, you know, get it on the record that we object to, you know, what they've done, so it reserves our rights to appeal this decision, which you could tell made the judge mad that I knew enough to do that. So I chased this guy down outside the courtroom, and I just point blank went up to him and I said, I've seen you at a lot of hearings. Who are you? And he said, my name is Wyatt Holtzclaw, and I represent Paul Zellerbach, and I work for the Smith Law Firm located in La Sierra, California, and he gave me an address. Well, once I knew who he was, then we could go back and we could recall that he had been at lots of different hearings, apparently just, you know, watching what this family that's suing the DA of the county, what they're doing and how this is going. But he's protected by everyone else, because even in hearings where he should have had his name read for the record, Paul Zellerbach's name should have been read into the record, he should have been put down on the official record as being the attorney representing the elected DA, they managed to not have him say a word on the record. They managed to keep Paul Zellerbach's name out of any of the transcripts collectively. Mm-hmm. And the judge who oversaw the restraining order hearing uses Zachary, being a minor, as an excuse to seal the entire case. So we just get railroaded at every turn. They do not want this out in the public. They do not want any light shed upon their cockroach activities.
Right.
And we're not standing for it. We are going to talk, and we are going to expose the injustices that have been done. And what is very curious, after this hearing where I chase this guy down and our default judgments are ruled against, and the judge just basically says, you know, you can sue, but you have to serve these things again. Well, we had considered actually appealing this decision, trying to get the case taken up to an appellate level court, but we literally did not have the $700 that it takes to file an appeal case at the lowest appellate level here in Riverside County. And we weren't sure that it wasn't just going to be a complete waste of money yet again. I can't even tell you the thousands of dollars it cost to file. I mean, they count on the fact that people don't have the means, they don't have the tenacity or the intelligence to look up these codes and try to figure things out. Try to go through the hoops that they want you to do to file a suit. You know, it has to be dotted in a certain way, and it has to be on a certain weight paper even.
Really?
When you go back to common law, which is what, you know, natural law, common law is based upon natural law. And that is the last that we ever had of anything that makes any kind of sense. So to Dave and I, trying to at least exert common law over this statutory code nightmare seemed like the avenue to try to go, to try to say, look, We just want to go back to some basics. We want our case to be heard in a court that recognizes common law. It's never been taken off the books as though it doesn't exist anymore. You can't have constitutional law without common law.
Right.
And I'll tell you right now, I think that since the Patriot Act was passed in 2001 after the towers fell, that, the Constitution is barely has a heartbeat right now.
Right, yeah.
But Dave and mine, our premise is we've got to at least hold these people accountable to the Constitution and the amendments that give us supposedly the right to free speech and the right to have a gun in our house and the right to not be searched and seized upon without a true warrant that actually had probable cause in it. There are so many carts running around down at this commercial administrative court that they not only are there, no horses behind the cart, there's no horses at all.
Yeah.
There's just carts down there rolling around where no questions of how do we go from point A to point Z without answering any of these questions in between. How can you persecute this family and prosecute this family when you have never even answered the question, how did you get a search warrant without any real probable cause?
Right.
And what you're claiming is probable cause has obviously been tampered with by your own police department. The dates aren't right on it. You've mailed the evidence before you saw it. You got your dates all screwed up. But nobody will answer these questions for us, these basic questions.
It's like just lie after lie. It's built, it's a house of cards, basically. And well, I mean, accountability is one of the major problems here, that people have not been standing up like what you're trying to do here in this case and actually hold them accountable to what is occurring and why they did all this. And most people have backed down, which is, I believe, how this has been even able to get out of hand in the way it has. On the other hand, it seems to be very much of a kind of a local phenomena to a certain extent in Marietta and even Riverside County, as we had some very interesting similarities here with the Julia and BJ Davis story that we had. We had them on a while back, and I believe that this was in the same area, basically, right?
Yes, Riverside County is a large county, and it goes all the way out to Blythe at the Colorado River that runs through Blythe, and Riverside County goes all the way down to the San Diego border, where right there is, across is Mexico, and that's where Julia was stationed, was in one of those border Homeland Security stations, but she lived in Rancho Mirage, I believe it was, or Palm Desert itself, which is part of this county that we happen to live in. We just happen to be in the more western part of the county. Mm. So yes, it's a very good point. And, when we listened to that program, it was rather terrifying to hear that they had been fighting local law enforcement, state-level police, as well as federal, for 9 years. And we look at this and we say, okay, we've been doing this for 19, going on 20 months, and we're exhausted mentally, spiritually, physically, financially. It's just, it isn't easy. I understand why people cower and they get too afraid to do anything, to fight back. Yeah. And we have had our moments. I mean, we appreciate deeply everything that Bert did for us and helped us do from a pro se point of view. But as we progressed through this thing, Dave had been given a hearing date of, coincidentally, 12/30/13, the same day that Zach is supposed to have a hearing to come off of probation if he's been a good boy and he memorized all the laws in 3 states and didn't break any of them, and we paid the money that they were extorting out of us. Would they please, exonerate our son and let him off the hook for this childhood crime that, is looking like it's going to follow his family for a very, very, very long time. So Dave had a booking-generated hearing date of also the morning of 12:30. Well, on 12:29, Dave gets a text message from Zachary's attorney, who we haven't spoken to in months. She cannot stand us. We're not real fond of her either. She hasn't helped us do anything. She's literally gone in there and lied and said that Zach was willing to call in on himself like he's a grown-up, and on and on and on it went. She has no problem just lying in court. It makes no difference to her. She's just doing her job, quote unquote. But she texts Dave at 7:30 in the evening and said, you don't need to go to this hearing tomorrow morning. The DA is probably, quote unquote, going to drop the charges. Well, we
Really?
called bondsman and we said, look, we don't trust this woman any further than we could throw her. And he said, are you kidding me? You better be there in the morning. I'm going to be there. We're going to go see if you're on the docket. And if you're not, that puts them on a 15-day clock that they either have to put up or shut up. They have to file some charges, official charges against you, or the bond is exonerated within 15 days.
Let me interject here, Henrik, that I was arrested on 11/1/2013, but they had no warrant, which they've still never produced an arrest warrant, and they had not even generated any actual charges at that point. And no charges were actually generated for 2 months.
Huh.
So I was basically arrested without anything.
Taken in there, charged with a misdemeanor charge while he was in jail because he refused to give his DNA as an innocent person who had never been before a judge, who had no official charges, no arrest warrant had ever been produced. He said, no, I've asked to go before a magistrate or a judge or what they call an OR, which is like an officer of the day that, deals with legal issues of people who have been jailed over the weekend, which they did on purpose because they had hoped they could just scare Dave and hold him as long as possible, which they did because, to our understanding, when you post a bond, they accept the bond. They cannot hold the bond and the body at the jail at the same time for more than, a couple of hours while they process a person out of the jail. But in Dave's case, they held the $50,000 bond and they held his body for 18 additional hours, making 27 hours of unjustified hell.
Yeah.
I mean, this is supposedly a crime, quote unquote, he committed in April of 2013, and you're not arresting him until November 1 of the same year, 7 months later, yet you take him and you feign a body cavity search in front of a room full of people sitting at computers where double doors are opened up. It's not private. There's no nurse. There's no official personnel. An officer brings you in there and says, drop your pants, spread them. And it was a farce because they didn't do a body cavity search. They just made him spread his cheeks in front of a room full of people sitting at computers.
Oh, man.
Because they can.
Well, so I'm sorry, Dave. What was the original, charge again? That the original arrest. What was that about again?
Well, when I was being arrested on 11/1, I was told that I was being arrested for the manufacture of a controlled substance.
Oh, yeah, right, exactly.
And child endangerment, but nothing was actually generated. In other words, there was no actual formal charges anywhere, and we were incessant. We called the police department, we called the sheriff's department, we called the clerk's office, and we called the DA's office and the city attorneys. We kept cycling through those different departments saying, look, I've been arrested.
Where are the official charges? Yeah. None ever came in the mail like they did for Zach.
Yeah.
No one's produced a warrant, and no one's produced charges. What's up with that? And literally, I was ignored.
Never got an answer.
So, okay, well, I'll let you guys finish here as well, and lead us up to today and where we're at and all with this. But I do have a couple of questions after that. There.
We're getting to the end of this. So, on January 9, Sharon Cosgrove, Zachary's attorney, yet again texts Dave and says, "You better call your bondsman. The DA is trying to get another arrest warrant to re-arrest you and charge you officially." And it's like, okay, so he's been arrested unlawfully without a warrant on 4/20. He's been arrested on 11/1 without a warrant. And now they're petitioning the judge to grant them yet another. They don't have any arrest warrants. So this time they're trying to get one for what? So they can just harass Dave again? Apparently so. But what happens is we decide, after talking to Bert and other people, that we're just going to get out of town for a few days because, we don't want to be followed around. We don't want to give them an easy opportunity to arrest Dave again. So we went to my sister's, which is in a neighboring county, and thought, at the very least, they're going to have to involve law enforcement officials from San Bernardino County if they're going to push this to arrest Dave yet again for nothing. But what happens is he has to go be arraigned on the 15th of January. This is now 2014. We get there, and this is the last hearing in which Dave represents himself. And he goes before Judge Davis, and he had, on the 9th of January, we had filed what is called a demurrer, where we were trying to get the officials to look at the blatant improprieties that were going on with our case. And at the very least, assign a special prosecutor. Send this to another court in a different area of the county. Anything. But get us out of this area where, these rogue cops are being allowed out of their jurisdiction to make arrests without warrants, etc., etc., etc. They ignore this demurrer, which was actually a very, very well-written document just stating all of the improprieties that had gone on. And when Dave went to court on the 15th of January 2014, he entered the demurrer again, which had attachments to it of a people's complaint that we had sent to the DA and to this DA's office here locally. And they kept pushing Dave's case off. And for people who have never been in court, when you get there in the morning, they take roll call. And people who aren't there on time, the court banking starts ratcheting up, and they start putting out warrants for people's arrest, up to $400,000 for this kind of a warrant and that kind of a warrant, and it just goes down the list. And they decide who they can deal with initially and who's going to have to be on what's called second call or third call. So Dave goes to the podium for first call, he gets pushed to second call, then he gets pushed to third call because, frankly, they don't want anyone pro se being an example for anybody else who is in the courtroom, sitting there, listening to other people's proceedings. So this has been the way it's been handled pretty much every time we've been to that court until we hired this civil rights attorney who is helping us now. So by third call, Dave has entered this demurrer again, and Judge Davis asks him, he says, "I have read your demurrer," which the demurrer was like 10 pages on its own, and these attachments were up to, 40, 50 pages of different kinds of attachments describing all of what has gone on in this case. And he says, "I read it. I read the whole thing. Do you want me to rule on it?" Mm-hmm. Well, you're scared to death. We had, been told to try to get a special hearing to deal with this on its own. But you still have your humanity in there that's saying, this whole thing is so crazy. Maybe this is our opportunity that if we just let him rule on it, he's going to, if he really read it and he sees what these police and what has been going on, maybe he will do the right thing.
Right, yeah.
And Dave can't talk to anybody. He's having to make this decision as he's standing at that podium by himself because at that point, we were so disenchanted with the attorney that we had hired.
Of course.
We were scared to death to go down the attorney avenue at all. Mm. But after that experience, we just, we were like, it wouldn't matter if Odin, Jesus, Muhammad, Buddha, they all showed up right next to us in physical form and said, "You know what, this is crazy. You guys really need to drop this case." It wasn't going to happen.
Right.
It not going to happen. They are going to make an example. They do not want other people questioning their authority, and that was going to be it. So they tricked us. Dave said, yes, go ahead and rule on it. And he says, I deny it. And then Dave said, well, can you explain to me why? And he said, you're wanting to act like an attorney, you figure it out. And he said, he basically was very cruel and very demeaning. And he just said, look, you want to be an attorney, you figure it out. And I'm holding you to exactly the same level as a barred attorney. There are Supreme Court cases in California that say it is your constitutional right to represent yourself, and you cannot be held to the same level as an experienced attorney.
Right.
But this doesn't matter to Judge Davis. So that was the day we finally leave. They reschedule the arraignment. It doesn't happen. And we decide that at this point, we just have to find an attorney that we feel like we can trust to help us through this nightmare. Well, we hired an attorney, but he ended up being a worse nightmare than Sharon Cosgrove, which is saying a lot. And in the 11th hour, I don't even want to get into all of that, but at the 11th hour, through a lot of miraculous things, a civil rights attorney named Melody Kramer has basically decided to take on this messy cause, the family Dortch's cause. And this earthbound angel who is disgusted by the state of affairs in the legal system is helping us at this point. And one of the first things she did was she helped us maintain our rights against this slanderous email that falsely accuses us of being sovereign citizens. She was able to refile our civil suit, which we were forced to drop because when we were not able to follow through with the appeals portion of the default judgments, Riverside County Court took it upon themselves to send out our civil case that we had filed on our own. They sent it to a judicial council in LA who ruled that all Riverside County judges be disqualified from hearing our civil case. And then LA County moved our case from LA, which has now been moved from Riverside to LA. Now LA assigns our civil case to Orange County Court.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Orange County Court, for anybody who knows Southern California, going to Orange County from the Inland Empire is nothing less than a nightmare of traffic. Right. So they basically did this because even to show up for a 5-minute case management hearing would have taken us no less than 3 hours to get down there.
Right.
And they didn't notify us of one of the case management hearings we were supposed to have attended for our civil suit. But yet, the sanctions they were going to level upon us went to both of our post office boxes as well as our home address. So they couldn't notify us that we needed to appear, but they certainly notified us they were going to fine us for not showing up. So we just felt like, you know what, at this point, because Dave had been arrested, it had taken it to a whole nother mental, stressful level. We went and I filed a document to drop that civil suit without prejudice, which means you have 10 years that you can pick it back up. And to make a long story short, Melody appeared through miraculous means at literally the 11th hour, and she filed a new civil suit on our behalf, protecting and maintaining our rights against the slanderous part of this case, the cause of action dealing with that, and all of the other civil rights violations that we have had. And as she dealt with our criminal attorney, Michael Levinson, she finally said, we've got to fire him. I haven't done defense law in a while, but I couldn't do worse. So this blessed woman, for basically no money at all, has taken on defending Dave criminally and defending us civilly as a family against these allegations that we purport are false. And where we are now is, once she took over the case, she immediately filed a document which was a motion to disqualify the entire Riverside County DA's office. And the document that she submitted was just beautiful. I mean, it just goes through how they have falsified documents. They have tampered with evidence. They have, in their own reports, they admit to destroying most of this quote-unquote lab they set up.
Right.
So our attorney can't look at it. We can't retest these substances that they are prosecuting Dave under because they, quote-unquote, destroyed them while this case is active and ongoing, and we are questioning and fighting them on every single detail.
Ooh, this is not, well, it's not good what they've been doing.
Nope.
Oh, man, they've been doing some real mistakes along the way, haven't they?
They certainly have.
Yeah.
Then, to complicate matters more, on the 17th of July, we show up with Michael Levinson, because Melody hasn't taken over yet at this point, for the actual preliminary hearing. Finally, we've they've pushed it out and pushed it out. This arrest happened in November, and we're just now having a preliminary hearing in July of 2014.
Yeah.
So does this tell you how hard we've fought back, and they've tried to postpone things, and it just goes and it goes and it goes. So we get there for this preliminary hearing, and Dave goes in, and they promptly come right back out. And they wouldn't let even me or my mom or my sister or anybody even go in the courtroom that morning. But they go in, Dave and his attorney go in, and within 5 minutes, they're back out. And I'm looking, and I'm like, what is going on? And our attorney takes us in this little room off the hallway, and he says, they've offered the DA, Deputy DA, Paul Spatinko, has offered to lower this to a misdemeanor possession charge. And we're thinking, oh my goodness, this is no longer a felony. This would be just a misdemeanor. And they're talking about deferred entry judgment, which would be basically like they did for Zachary, putting him on a probationary period. And then if you're good during the probationary period, it all goes away. It's never entered into the record. It's as if it never even happened. Well, we asked for some time to be able to consider this offer and to have our attorney deal with the Board of Optometry because of Dave's licensing and all of this kind of stuff that's at risk because of these crazy charges these people have made up.
Yeah.
And when we start asking for the specifics of this offer, our own attorney is so vague. He won't answer direct questions. He refuses to say, what part of the code are they using? What substance are they saying that Dave that he would be saying he was guilty of? Well, Melody is on the case now. And so she sends a letter and phone calls to Mr. Spatinko, the deputy DA assigned to Dave's case. And she gets a phone message back from him. Do you know where that is? I'm going to find the message. But
sure,
in the message that he leaves on her phone, this is what he says. I have proposed a misdemeanor resolution that I think will allow him, David, to keep his license. I think it's going to be an answer, but he had to check it, so we put it out one more time for him to check with the licensing board and so forth. But what I have is a misdemeanor proposal on the table. I don't pretend to know how you advise Mr. Dortch, but in terms of, I think, the civil suit with Murrieta and so forth, I would say he should stop throwing good money after bad. Murrieta is a nice town. His kid did what he did and so forth. I leave it up to you to advise him, ... He seems like a guy who's kind of got his stuff together in a lot of ways, and he may not want to keep on making trouble for himself. So now we've got the deputy DA, who has nothing to do with our civil suit anymore, because at this point they're not named as defendants any longer, wrapping our civil case into the criminal case, and basically it's a veiled threat that you better drop this civil suit against these officers and this, the city of Marietta and the sheriff's department and on and on and on, and stop throwing good money after bad and stop making trouble for yourself.
Right, yeah.
So 2 different times now, this local DA's office has wrapped up our civil suit and made reference to the fact that if we want any kind of treatment from them that makes any sense, we better drop our civil suit.
Yeah. Oh, awesome.
So we proceed on to reschedule. She files this motion to disqualify, which gets put out until the 25th of September, or no, the 4th of September. We're supposed to go to a hearing to accept or deny this misdemeanor offer, which suddenly, mind you, we get there, and Fatinko, we get informed, is having congestive heart failure and has been taken off the case and is in the hospital. Don't know if our case had anything to do with his heart problem, but I venture to guess the answer to that is yes.
Yeah.
Because Melody took his word-for-word voicemail threatening us to drop our civil suit, and she formulated a letter to Paul Zellerbach, who is the elected DA. And I don't know, how much time we want to go into, but it is a pretty scathing letter that she sent to Zellerbach, just going through what all is being done and saying at the minute that these people filed their original civil suit against you as the lead defendant, you should have hired or assigned a special prosecutor to this case, and you did not.
Right.
And this is just one impropriety after another, that this is basically the fox guarding the hen house.
Yep.
How can these people get a fair trial over here when the deputy DA assigned to the case is saying you better drop your civil suit and stop throwing good money after bad and stop making trouble for yourself? How else are you to take this?
Yeah.
So, in this court's brilliance, when we go to the hearing on the motion to disqualify the Riverside County District Attorney's Office, they assign Judge Davis, the same judge who was the last judge that Dave went before pro se, who read all of our documents, so he said. And on the record in this hearing, he claims to know no particulars about our case, and that he can fully make an unbiased decision against his own co-workers down here, the DA's office, and make a completely unbiased decision as to whether or not this DA's office should be disqualified or not. So I'm sure you can take a wild guess as to which way that motion went. He denied it.
Mm-hmm.
Our preliminary hearing then got scheduled for the 25th of September. And when we went to the hearing on the 25th of September, they only put 2 witnesses on the stand, and people need to understand that a preliminary hearing is supposedly like a mini trial without a jury, but the burden of proof is so incredibly lax for the prosecution that they virtually are never denied taking it to trial.
Mm-hmm.
And so the evidence that their 2 officers provided, and one of them was just the sheriff who dealt with Dave refusing to give his DNA, so that was pretty short, and then they blessed him because he had worked the night shift over at that crazy jail, and they sent him home. And then the only other person they put on the stand was Sheriff and Special Investigator Medina, who is the officer who lied in his reports and says that Dave was Mirandized when he made the comments that he did make. But even though he says in his own written report clearly that everything Dave said was Mirandized. Our attorney got him to say on the stand that yes, some of the comments were not on the record and he wasn't Mirandized. And he was unable to say which statements were Mirandized and which ones weren't. And he was given the title by Judge Davis as a quote-unquote limited expert, who then admitted that he doesn't know one thing about the concentrate that was found or allegedly found, and he doesn't know whether it's synthetic or organic, and he didn't do any research on it until he did some internet searches on it, probably the night before the preliminary hearing, because let me tell you, that man was an expert of nothing. And he gave us so much good information. He could not keep his story straight. He couldn't even find his own answers in his own report. Literally, the judge he was so concrete, the judge had to reinterpret questions for him several times and stop him and tell him, you're not even answering the question that they asked you. That is not what they asked you. I mean, it was literally a joke. It was literally a joke. And so now the next thing we have facing us is on November 14. We're supposed to go in, and Dave it'll be like a second arraignment, where he'll say that he's not guilty again, and no, he doesn't agree with all of the lying, false, misrepresented statements that Medina made during the preliminary hearing. And then they will schedule the first court date dealing with putting Dave on trial for nothing. I mean, literally, we have no victim.
Yeah.
There is no crime. We've never harmed another human being, neither one of us, in our entire existence upon this planet. And this is just what can happen to you if your 12-year-old does something stupid during their growing up years, like write on things. And I'd just like to mention that the officer, that's Mr. Temecula, we found a whole fluff bio on him when he won Mr. Temecula 2012 in his Speedo, laying on a wall covered in graffiti.
Oh, really?
So talk about mixed messages. Yeah. Kids are told this is illegal, but then when they play Tony Hawk video games, the only way that you can get extra points in the game is to do a trick while you do graffiti on a wall. You get a catalog for skating gear, and all of the models are skating in that gear in front of walls covered in graffiti.
Sure.
On the one hand, this is the art form of this generation, and they won't give them areas where they can do their art and then cover it up and let them do it again and again and again. They have BMX parks, they have skate parks for kids. I'm telling you right now, it would stop most of the money that they spend on cleaning up graffiti if they just had an area where kids could express themselves.
That's not the point now, is it?
But that's not the point.
Yeah.
We can have arresting officers who their bio says they're 5'9", but they towered over my 5'10" husband in our house. So they have lifts in their metal-tipped boots, military boots, so that they look like they're 6 feet or more. And that is who is sent to wake up 70-pound 12-year-olds.
Yeah.
And then we have a few other things that are just quite curious, and that is that during our case, the chief of police, who started out as Mike Beret, has been moved to Ventura County. The elected court clerk for Riverside County, Sherry Carter, has also been moved to LA, and she's a local Riverside girl. And Officer Puwadi, who we believe has what's called Brady information on our case that could probably exonerate my husband, he is now a quote-unquote former investigator, so we don't know what's happened to him. And Michael Lassig himself, Mr. Temecula, no one will claim him. Sheriff won't claim him, PD won't claim him, Highway Patrol won't claim him.
Really?
At the restraining order hearings, he was represented by the Attorney General himself. So we don't know what kind of clearance or who or what Michael Lathig actually is, but he was sent to our house to spend the day during the home invasion crime for this big-time criminal, 12-year-old first-time offender, 70 pounds soaking wet.
That's bizarre. Was he just like along for the ride or something? I mean, that's...
He was the one assigned to literally guard Dave, like he was going to take off and abandon our daughter and jet over the back fence and go where?
Yeah.
You know, why were they arrested? Why was Dave arrested with no arrest warrant and chained to a chair for 5 hours when they came in our house and there's no crime going on?
Right. Yeah.
Literally, there's no crime. Zach's asleep. He's not spray painting anything. He's 5 weeks post being interrogated for 4 hours in a police department. Trust me, the kid was instantly reformed. This is not a child behavioral problem.
Right.
This is not a kid that was out to maliciously destroy his entire community because he's, some disturbed little future felon.
At the time, he said, Henrik, that literally when we asked him about when he did this, because we were puzzled too, because he was pretty much always around when we were around. So he said he did it sometimes after he got off the bus, and it was literally on a very, very main stretch of road. He said many times, cars were never even looking at him, and nobody seemed to care. So he said he would draw something, mostly with marker, sometimes with some paint, but mostly markers and crayons.
Yeah.
And they would paint over it, and then he thought he had a fresh canvas to do it again.
Yeah.
So, again, no justification for what was being done, but he was very concrete, and he was literally he viewed it as a kind of a message board. He would draw something, and he'd see someone else draw something, and then he'd come back, and there'd be a clear spot again.
Yeah.
He didn't know what it was being viewed as, and when the whole case got open, the terminology changed from graffiti to tagging, which also carries with it more like a
gang stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
It connotates gang.
And this is how
else.
they justified bringing in gang task force. I mean,
right.
Apparently there were about 25 different agencies represented that came through the house in that 7.5 hours. And we were told we were going to get a bill for that. And it was like they ran some sort of drill. It was absolutely insane.
Right.
It was a week after the Boston bombing situation or so.
Oh, really? Oh, yeah, okay. That's right.
And I forgot to mention that after they arrested Dave on the same stuff that was so anciently old from back in April, the police made yet another referral to Child Protective Services. So here we are in a different home, in a different area of town, 9 months later, or 7.5 months later at this point, and we had 2 more visits from Child Protective Services, which obviously found nothing. Nothing that could be potentially harmful to our children.
Simply because I was arrested.
So that's clear. That's cleared now. Then, in terms of, as far as you're concerned, the Child Protective Services, they won't be coming after you.
Well, we hope not. But the lady who was here last, she said, "Oh, don't be surprised if they send us out again."
Yeah. Well.
They can open it up anytime they want to.
Oh, sure, definitely. I mean, there's tons of those stories where they just show up and they just take your kid and that's it.
Yep.
We have cases like that in Sweden too. They just take the kids and they hold them and there's just no way of getting them.
It's happening all over America for parents not agreeing with Lord Doctor's recommendations, and never mind this police system. I mean, being a nurse, there's been times where I've said things like, is there not something like HIPAA, which is the Privacy Act for healthcare, in law enforcement? No, there's not. They do not have to protect your identity. And even their codes that say they're supposed to protect a minor's identity, they don't. They released press releases that they already had prepared on Saturday, April 20th. This was so thought out in advance. This just doesn't happen.
Let me ask you about that. Let's kind of back up here a little bit then, because why do you think that they did go after you guys in the way they did? Because any of the things that they were trying to get you on and hold you for, including the marijuana first, and then what they found potentially on your computers, what have you, all of this were reconstructions that they tried to piece together afterwards, as far as I can tell, unless they had some way of randomly spying on people, let's say, and targeting someone for those reasons. But what's your thoughts at this stage, guys?
We go between a lot of those different options, and we hope that during this thing, maybe some of that will be revealed. But those are questions that just stick in your mind, and you're just like, really? I mean, I have 200 friends on Facebook on my personal page, and as a nutritional therapist, I have a natural nutrition nurse page where I put up health information. And, part of my health information is that cannabis oil cures a heck of a lot.
Yep.
And that, chemtrails in the sky are one of our number one health issues because they're poisoning our air supply and they're falling on our soil. So if that makes me a big enough fish that they feel that there's so little going on in Murrieta, Riverside County, California, that this is reason enough to persecute and prosecute an American family who has never made public statements about their political or religious beliefs or anything else for that matter. I do not know how we have become to this level targeted individuals and quote-unquote enemies of the state.
Right, yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, grant you, I think there may be some secret checkoff list. You quit vaccinating your children, check mark.
Right.
You start questioning government schools and you want to homeschool your child so they're not indoctrinated in the Common Core, you get a check mark.
Yeah.
You listen to Red Ice Radio and John Rappaport and, some of the other people that we frequent their sites, maybe that gets you a check mark. I don't know, folks.
Yeah.
When it can be this lax and you can go through the level of hell to pay that we have had to pay since asking questions. Asking questions.
Well, exactly. But I mean, again, what you guys have been doing here is that's rare in the way that you've been trying to fight this. You have been fighting it in the way you've been standing up to these people. And obviously, it's going to be very interesting to see how this unfolds now, because just as you said before, they've done a lot of mistakes along the way, and this could unravel in a potentially actually very interesting way. I mean, I think I searched for, Murrieta a little bit earlier, and I got a hit for, was it the mayor now that was caught for DUI, I believe? He crashed into four, cheerleaders or something like that.
Last week, my daughter's former high school, she ended up graduating from a charter, but she went there for her freshman year. We've lived in this valley since 1999, and yep, the mayor of Murrieta hit a carload of cheerleaders and put all of them in the hospital, of them for more than one day. He has resigned, but he is making public statements that he is not stopping his re-election campaign because he feels he will be exonerated. And you know what? I have to stand back and I have to look at the amount of lies that it's called the Murrieta Patch. It's an online paper here that we're quite sure is probably owned by a former retired police officer, but we refer to it as the Murrieta PD Weed Patch because it's just a mouthpiece for the police. They don't have any semblance of any kind of judicious journalism. This is the local Inquirer, so to speak.
Right, yeah.
And they have been allowed to literally, we know that it's members of law enforcement that are making some of the comments on these pages because they know things that only law enforcement knows. And one of the retaliatory things that has happened to us is during the first attempt at a preliminary hearing where they offered this misdemeanor charge, which I never quite finished that, it comes out when Levinson, our first defense attorney, Michael Levinson, has a talk with Melody, our civil rights attorney. He lets it fly that Dave would be saying that he is guilty to possession of methamphetamine, which never has entered this case anywhere. But then what we find out is Riverside County and a lot of counties in California get federal grant money for any probationary deferred entry judgment on methamphetamine, so they can feed you through some rehabilitation channel.
It's part of the PC 1000 code.
Oh, yeah?
So they get money if it's related to methamphetamine, where they would not get money if it was related to a naturally occurring natural substance that we all walk around in our own bodies with.
Interesting.
Namely, DMT.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So, it really gets crazy, because now the Deputy District Attorney, Jade Holden, who has now been assigned as Dave's prosecuting attorney, she won't even acknowledge that a misdemeanor offer was ever even on the table.
Okay.
And her excuse for that is that Spatinko, who is in the hospital with congestive heart failure, quote unquote, never annotated the file. So I guess that would be equivalent to me as a nurse never charting something on a patient and never doing a late entry charting. Therefore, it doesn't exist.
Exactly.
I checked that patient's blood sugar, and I could tell you that I checked their blood sugar, and it was a certain number. That would not cut it. I would have had to have written it down. And Spatinko never wrote it down, because this is how business is done at the court. It's done in chambers. It's done in little hallways off of the main hallway. And that's the way it's done. Handshakes in the back corners. Very little actually gets said on the record. It's that part's theater. And when we've ordered the transcripts from other hearings regarding our son, I kid you not, it literally lists it as Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3.
Right.
It's theater.
Yeah.
It's theater.
Yeah.
That's all it is. And not only is our mayor, in trouble for different things, Paul Zellerbach, the elected DA for the county, and we can send you links to this stuff, he has been charged with the exact same charges as our son, because he was caught by the Indio sheriffs, Riverside County sheriffs, who have apparently turned on him, and they filmed him. They didn't stop him, mind you. They filmed him destroying his opponent's sign in the last election to elect a new DA in this county, to which
Really?
Zellerbach lost.
Really?
He lost
That's
to
funny.
Michael Pestrin, who there's all sorts of impropriety surrounding this man as well. The mayor of Temecula, the city neighboring us, also in Riverside County, has been caught flashing fake badges at people and pulling them over on the side of the road. This is what your mayor in Temecula can do now. And so he's been in trouble for that. And then when they opened up that investigation, they found that somehow $300,000 of his campaign money has ended up in his sister Lori Stone's account. And not only that, his sister Lori, who is not any kind of government official in this valley, is driving a government car paid for by the taxpayers, and she gets to fill that gas tank up at the little station they have for the